Montana Territory, June 1883. The wind cut down from the mountains sharp as a blade when the train failed to come. Sylvie Keaton pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and stared down the empty track. Her grip on the travel bag was firm, though her hands had long since gone numb. The sun had dropped behind the ridge line, casting the Bitterroot Range in shadow, and still she waited. She had been standing there since morning. Behind her, the small station in Ravalli had gone quiet. The telegraph boy had stopped checking the wire. The agent had already locked the office and gone home. One farmhand had offered to walk her to the boarding house down the road, but she had refused. She could not leave. Not yet. Not until she was sure. The letter had said the train would come for her and her 2 children. But the train had not come, and her children were not with her. They were gone. She had buried Harriet and Henry in the Kansas dirt 6 weeks ago. Scarlet fever had taken them both in the same week. She had not even had time to wash the bedsheets between them. Afterward, there had been nothing left to keep her there. No husband, no siblings, no neighbors who would meet her eye, so she packed the only bag she could carry and took the last of her savings to buy a train ticket north. A man in Missoula had promised work and lodging, said she could help with his store, maybe start over, but the letter had been dated 3 months ago. Maybe the offer had dried up. Maybe he had changed his mind. Maybe he had never meant it. The cold settled deep in her bones. She closed her eyes and leaned against the post that held the station sign, willing herself not to cry again. There were no more tears left to shed. Then the sound of hooves. She turned, heart jumping. For half a second, she thought maybe it was a rider from the train, someone with word from the depot down the line. But it was not a station agent. It was a cowboy. He came up the road slow, riding a tall, dark bay with a white blaze down its face. He wore a dust-covered hat and a long coat, and there was a rifle slung across his saddle. His boots were worn, his jaw rough with stubble, and his eyes, when they found hers, were tired but kind. He stopped a few feet from the platform and looked her over carefully. "You waiting for the northbound?" he asked, voice low and even. "Yes," she said, her voice hoarse. "It was supposed to come this morning." "It is not coming," he said. "Tracks washed out near the pass. I came through there yesterday. They will not be cleared for a week." "Maybe longer," her breath caught. "It has to come. I have to get to Missoula." He looked at her again, slower this time. "You alone?" She nodded. "Something in Missoula worth getting to?" "No," she said, sharper than she meant. Then she swallowed and looked down. "I do not know any more." The cowboy dismounted and took his hat off. His hair was damp with sweat, and he ran a hand through it before stepping up onto the platform. "Name is Declan Whitlow." She blinked at him. He offered his hand. "You look like you could use a better place to be than here." She hesitated, then took it. His hand was warm and rough, solid in a way that made her knees go weak. "Sylvie," she said. "Sylvie Keaton," he nodded. "Well, Sylvie Keaton, I got a cabin about a half-day's ride from here. Safe, quiet. Firewood stacked. You can rest there tonight. I will take you to Missoula when the tracks clear. And if they never do, then I will take you the long way around." She stared at him, unsure what to say. "Why would you do that?" He looked down at her hand in his. "Because you look like someone who needs to be carried forward." She let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Declan helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. She leaned back into the warmth of his chest as the horse started down the trail. She had never ridden like this before, but she did not feel afraid. The land opened up around them, golden fields giving way to forest. The road was narrow, but Declan guided the horse like he knew every bend. He did not speak much, just told her when to duck under a branch or shift her weight before a steep slope. By nightfall, they reached the cabin. It was small, nestled between tall pines, with smoke curling from the chimney. Inside, it smelled of pine pitch and coffee. He helped her down, showed her the wash basin, the corner bed, the kettle. She sat by the fire while he pulled off his coat and hung it to dry. "You live here alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Used to drive cattle for a ranch out east, then worked a line crew down near Helena. Got tired of people. This place is quiet." She looked around the one-room cabin. "It is nice." He glanced at her, then knelt to stir the fire. "I will sleep out in the barn. You can have the bed." "No," she said quickly. "I do not want you to. It is not about wanting," he said. "It is how I do things." She stared at him, then nodded. That night she lay in bed under a wool blanket, the firelight flickering on the walls. She heard him moving outside, the sound of the stall doors, the murmur of his voice to the horse. She closed her eyes and for the first time in weeks slept through the night. When she woke, there was coffee on the stove and bread warming on a pan. Declan sat at the table, carving something from a piece of wood. "Morning," he said. "Morning." She poured herself coffee with a shaking hand. He watched her, then reached out and gently steadied the cup. "Your children," he said quietly. "You lost them," she nodded, unable to speak. He looked down at his carving. "I had a brother once, got caught in a mine shaft collapse. Was the only family I had left. I am sorry." He shrugged one shoulder. "I am too." They sat in silence for a while. Later, they fed the horses together, walked through the woods behind the cabin. She found herself laughing when a squirrel darted up Declan's leg to steal a crust from his pocket. He grinned once, not a smile, but something close. By the third day, she no longer asked about the train. By the fifth, she had stopped thinking about Miss Ola altogether. On the seventh morning, she helped him split wood. Her hands were blistered, but she did not complain. He watched her closely, and when she dropped the axe once from tired fingers, he stepped forward and caught her wrist. "You do not have to do this," he said. "I want to," she said. He reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Her breath caught. "I have not felt anything in so long," she whispered. "I know," he said, and then he kissed her. It was not quick. It was not careful. It was warm and steady and full of everything neither of them had words for. She leaned into him, hands gripping the front of his shirt. When they pulled away, his forehead rested against hers. "I did not come here to fall in love," she said. "Neither did I," he said, "but I think I have." She laughed, tears in her eyes. "Then carry me into tomorrow, Cowboy," and he did. The rain came down steady a few days after they shared that kiss, soaking the clearing outside the cabin and turning the trail to mud. Sylvie stood at the window, hands wrapped around a tin mug of tea, watching the drops fall from the eaves in thin, silvery lines. She wasn't used to this kind of quiet, the way the trees seemed to hush each breath, how the roof softened every sound of the world outside. Back in Kansas, storms came in hard and left fast. Here, they settled in like they meant to stay a while. Declan was in the lean-to, mending the harness straps with a needle and a thick length of wax thread. She could see him through the warped glass, his brow low, fingers moving with the same slow precision he used when he tended the fire or saddled his horse. Everything he did came from a place of steady knowing, like he'd spent a long time figuring out how to live without wasting movement. She stepped outside, pulling her shawl over her hair. The earth was soft under her boots. "You always work in the rain?" she asked, stopping just shy of the post where he'd hung the harness. "Leather don't care about weather," he said, not looking up. "If it splits, it splits. Needs fixing when it needs fixing." She crouched beside him. "Can you show me?" He passed her the other needle, the thread already knotted. "You ever stitched hide?" "No, only cloth. Once a mattress ticking, but that was years ago. Same rhythm, just thicker skin." She worked the needle through the worn edge of the strap, fingers clumsy at first. He didn't correct her, just watched, quiet as he always was when something mattered. I used to think I'd end up in a town with a picket fence, she said, eyes on the leather. A place with church bells and front porches. I never pictured trees like this. Picket fences keep things out. Or in, he said, adjusting his grip on the awl. These trees don't hold you either way. I don't know what to do with that much space, she admitted. That's all right, he said. You don't have to do anything with it, just be here. She finished the length of stitches, tied off the thread. Her hands were shaking a little, not from the cold. Did you ever want something different? She asked. He leaned back, resting on his heels. I thought about heading west once. Oregon, maybe. Heard talk of green valleys and river trout big as your forearm. But I figured I'd bring my trouble with me wherever I went. She turned to look at him. What kind of trouble? He hesitated, then said. The kind that lingers. A man does certain things when he's young. Some of them don't sit easy after. You ran from it. No. I just stopped chasing anything else. They sat in silence for a moment, the rain tapping soft against the roof above them. I'm not sure I know how to build something new, she said. You don't start with building, he replied. You start with staying. The next morning the rain had passed. Mist clung low between the trees. Sylvie rose early and went down to the creek alone. The water ran high from the storm, but she found a flat rock and sat with her skirts tucked up, letting the cold seep into her bare feet. She didn't think of Kansas, not of the graves or the empty rooms. She thought of the way Declan moved through his days quiet, deliberate, like the land itself had taught him how to breathe. When she returned, he was splitting kindling behind the cabin. She stopped beside him and rested her hand on his forearm. I want to stay, she said. He set down the hatchet and looked at her, long and searching. You sure? He asked. She nodded. I don't need fences, but I think I need you. He took her hand then, rough palm closing around her fingers. Well, I think you've had me from the start. That night, they shared the bed for the first time, not out of need but choice. The fire burned low, casting the room in amber. No words passed between them. They didn't need any. His hands told her everything, how careful he could be, how much he meant it. She fell asleep with her head on his chest, the sound of his heart steady beneath her ear. In the days that followed, she learned how to set snares and read tracks in the snow-damp earth. He taught her how to listen for weather in the hush of the trees, how to find the trail again if she ever lost it. One afternoon, she asked him if he believed in signs. Depends, he said, lifting a bundle of dried mint from the rafters. What kind? The kind that tell you you're where you're supposed to be. He turned to her, eyes warm. You're here, ain't you? She smiled. Yes. Then that's your sign, and she believed him. The first snow fell in the middle of October, light and dry, sifting through the pine boughs like flour through a sieve. Sylvie stood near the woodpile splitting tinder while Declan laid in the last of the kindling under the porch roof. A hawk cried once overhead, wheeling against the gray sky, its wings flashing pale against the clouds. She didn't speak until she finished the last log. That hawk's been circling the ridge since yesterday. Declan wiped his hands on a rag. There's a den of rabbits along the north slope. He's smart, waits till the snow softens their run. She set the axe against the chopping block. I used to think birds just flew without thinking, like they didn't have plans. They got more plans than most men I've known, Declan said, picking up the sack of cut wood. Just don't waste time talking about him. They moved inside together. The warmth of the fire reached out before they even stepped over the threshold. Sylvie closed the door behind them, the latch clicking into place with a sound that had grown familiar, almost comforting. He set the wood near the hearth, then looked to her. You still want to try your hand at canning, she nodded. Those late huckleberries won't keep long. I've got jars boiled. They worked side by side at the table, the fruit already sorted and washed, the sugar warmed just enough to pour smooth. The scent rose up sweet and sharp, and Sylvie found herself humming without meaning to. "You always hum when you cook?" Declan asked, his tone light. "I didn't know I was," she said, startled. "It's nice," he said, "like the sound of the stove settling." She stirred the pot in a slow rhythm. "My mother used to hum when she mended. Same tune, over and over. I never asked her what it was." "You miss her." Sylvie didn't answer right away. The sugar began to bubble, and she leaned over to test the syrup set against the side of the wooden spoon. "She died when I was 17. We weren't close, but sometimes I still hear her voice when I lace my boots." Declan nodded. "Funny what stays." They jarred the preserves in silence after that, the lids tightening down with clean, metallic clicks. She wiped the lip of each jar before setting it on the shelf, careful not to speak until the last one was cooling. "I wrote a letter to no one last week," she said, her back to him. He didn't answer right away. She turned and found him watching her, but not with surprise. "I do that sometimes," he said. "Write things I don't send, makes room inside. I think I was trying to tell them I forgive them, the people who didn't stay, people who looked away." "You have to say it out loud." "No," she said. "But I wanted to write it down so I'd stop carrying it in my chest." Declan came to stand beside her. "That's not weak, you know." "I didn't say it was. You looked like you thought it." She folded the towel in her hands. "Maybe I did." Later, she sat on the porch with her knees pulled up beneath her shawl, watching the light fade behind the trees. Declan joined her with 2 mugs of coffee, setting one beside her without a word. His coat was open at the throat, and the wind tugged at the edge of his collar. After a long quiet, he said, "I've been thinking about the land west of here. There's a stretch along the river where the soil's black and deep, not much wind. Could plant corn, maybe beans come spring." She turned to him. "You want to move?" "No." He looked at her steady. "I want to build something, with you, not just get through the winter." Sylvie stared down at the steam rising from her mug. "You're sure?" "I don't say things I don't mean." She reached for his hand, fingers curling around his. "Then let's build something." He exhaled, not a laugh, not a sigh, just the release of something held too long. That night, she opened the drawer beside the bed and set away the last of her Kansas belongings, a pressed flower from her daughter's Sunday dress, a ribbon from her son's toy box, and the letter that had first promised her a train to Missoula. She folded it once more and placed it beneath the others. When she turned back, Declan was standing by the fire, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his eyes soft. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "I'm finally where I was meant to be." He crossed the room and reached for her hand, and together they walked toward the bed they now shared, not out of necessity, but belonging. Outside, the snow thickened, quiet and sure. Inside, they reached for each other with a tenderness hard-earned and lasting. And for the first time in either of their lives, morning could come without fear. By early December, the first real cold had settled in deep enough to freeze the top layer of the creek and crust the ground hard beneath their boots. Inside the cabin, the fire stayed burning from sunup to long after dark, and Sylvie had learned the rhythm of feeding it before it ever asked. They'd begun drawing plans on scrap paper, using charcoal to mark out rough lines for planting rows, chicken pens, and a shed that would double as a smokehouse come next autumn. The land Declan had spoken of stretched west through a low saddle in the hills, where the trees thinned and the soil darkened with old ash and decomposed pine needles. He said the ground there drank water like it remembered better seasons. One morning after the frost had lifted but before the snow returned, they walked the ridge above the plot. Declan carried a spade over one shoulder and a canvas satchel slung across his back. Sylvie wore his spare scarf, tucked high around her jaw. "Where would you put the house?" she asked, stopping under a tall tamarack. He stepped beside her, eyes scanning the slope. Close enough to the creek to carry water without slipping, far enough it won't flood come spring. That rise there's dry, see how the grass stands stiff after the frost. That's your place. She looked at the patch he pointed to. A pair of young cottonwoods stood near it, bent slightly east from the wind. Between them the ground held a softness, almost like a welcome. I want a kitchen window that looks out facing the tree line, she said. Then your sink's going there. He took the spade and broke the ground once, just enough to see how the dirt gave. Sylvie crouched beside the hole and pinched the soil between her fingers. I thought I'd never want to start again, she said. But this doesn't feel like starting. It feels like continuing. Declan didn't answer right away. He reached into the satchel and pulled out a small tin box, the kind used to hold rifle cleaning tools. He handed it to her. Inside, folded tight, was a strip of muslin. She unraveled it slowly and found a ring tucked in the center, simple, silver, the band marked by a single line etched around its middle. It was my mother's, he said. She gave it to me before she passed, told me to use it when I found something worth holding. Sylvie's throat tightened. You're sure? I was sure the moment you stepped off that platform and looked west. She slipped the ring on her finger. It fit without tug or twist, like it had waited for her. They didn't speak of ceremonies or church bells. There was no preacher in the hills, and neither of them needed witness. The vow had lived in their days long before it passed their lips. That evening, she roasted parsnips and boiled a thick stew from dried venison and root vegetables. Declan sat near the fire, mending the sole of his boot with a curved needle, his brow furrowed in concentration. She watched him from the hearth, her feet tucked beneath her skirt. I've been thinking about keeping bees, she said. He looked up. Bees? There's clover down by the bend. And I read once that bees won't stay where the air is wrong. He set the boot aside. Then I reckon they do well here, she smiled. I'd like to try. They shared the stew from a single pot, passing the spoon back and forth without remark. Afterward, he leaned back on the floorboards, head against her knee, and she ran her fingers through his hair, slow and quiet. I never thought a man could be gentle, she said. I never knew a woman could be this still, he answered. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Inside, the fire hissed as a log shifted, and the shadows along the cabin walls danced in long, warm shapes. That night, he reached for her with a kind of grace she hadn't known existed in this world. There was no rush in him, no taking only offering. And she gave herself without fear for the first time in her life, not from sorrow or need, but because she wanted to be known, and he asked nothing she wasn't ready to give. Morning came with a frost so thick the windows filmed white. She woke with her back pressed to his chest, his breath steady at her neck. The silence of the world outside was total, broken only by the low call of a raven somewhere near the ridge. She turned in his arms and rested her forehead against his. Come spring, she whispered, I'll plant sunflowers beside the door, tall enough to follow the light all day. He nodded against her skin. And I'll build shutters that never stick. Their lives had no grand road, no witnesses to name their bond. But they had the work of their hands, and the land that waited, and the quiet knowledge that their tomorrow had already begun. And it was enough. The thaw came quiet and slow, softening the edge of the wind and sending rivulets down from the hills in thin, winding threads. Sylvie stood barefoot in the doorway, apron dusted with cornmeal, watching as the last of the snow melted between the roots of a fir tree near the fence line. Chickens scratched in the wet soil, their feathers damp and bright, and she could smell the smoke from the hickory logs Declan had split yesterday morning. Inside, bread rose beneath a cloth near the stove. She'd milled the flour herself, bartering dried berries for a small hand grinder from a trapper 2 valleys east. She liked the work of it, turning the crank slow, the steady weight of the stone wheel, the feel of the flour catching under her fingernails. Declan walked back from the edge of the field, shoulders damp from creek spray, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He traced the new fencing line that morning, counting paces from the maple tree to where the squash rows would run. When he reached her, he set a small stone in her palm, a flat, river-worn piece with a single quartz line running through it. "Thought it looked like one of your stitches," he said. She turned it over in her hand. "It does. Like a seam holding something together, or marking where something broke and still came out whole." She tucked it in her apron pocket. "I'll keep it near the flour tin." He leaned in then, brushed his lips against her temple. "There's a man I heard of 2 days' ride south, builds hand pumps. Says he can drill a well deep enough to keep through dry summers. You think he'll come this far? I can ride to him, offer labor and trade. He's got a reputation for taking work done honest." She nodded, fingers tracing the edge of her apron. "I'd like water from the ground we live on." After midday, she pulled the loaf from the oven and let it cool on the sill. Declan returned from the woodshed with a bundle of cedar planks, arms streaked with sawdust. They sat outside and ate thick slices of bread with the last of the apple butter, the sun just warm enough to sit without coats. "You ever think we'd get this far?" she asked, licking her thumb clean. "I didn't know what far looked like," he said. "Now I do." That night, she brought out the quilt she'd started sewing in February, laying it across the bed to finish the last of the hand-tied knots. She'd pieced it with scraps from both their lives, a sleeve from Declan's old work shirt, a strip of her daughter's dress hem, a patch of wool from the saddle blanket he never used. The colors didn't match, but she liked the look of it, earth and sky, dark and light, stitched into something warm and wide enough for two. Declan knelt beside her, tracing the stitches. "You're making a story out of cloth." "No," she said. "I'm making a place to rest." He kissed her then, not rushed or hesitant, but deep and rooted, like something grown from the ground up. She held his jaw in both hands as if steadying herself against joy. Later, wrapped beneath the quilt, they lay tangled in silence. His breath slowed against her collarbone, and she felt the weight of his hand across her hip. "You ever think about naming the land?" he murmured, voice low in the dark. "I don't need to," she said. "It already knows who we are." The next morning, Declan hitched the wagon and rode south to speak with the well man. Sylvie spent the afternoon raking mulch around the base of the early seedlings and checking the beehive frames they'd traded for in late winter. She'd written to a woman in Helena who kept bees for her orchard, and the woman had sent back a careful letter with instructions written in looping script. The bees had survived the journey and the winter. They moved now in and out of the hive with a hum like a low hymn. When Declan returned 2 days later, his coat dusted with travel, he brought news and a small box of nails wrapped in canvas. "He'll come in May," he said, leaning against the porch rail. "Said he could use help with his barn before the heat sets in." I told him I'd give 10 days of work in trade. She touched the collar of his shirt, brushing away a trail of pollen. "That's fair." They spent the next weeks preparing. Sylvie planted sunflowers along the edge of the new house foundation, their green shoots quick to rise. Declan laid the floor joists with hands steady and sure. Pausing only to drink from the tin cup she filled and carried out each afternoon. They slept in the cabin still, but each night they walked the frame of the new home, her hand in his, talking about where the shelves would go, how to angle the eaves to catch the rain. By June, the well stood firm beside the house, capped with a hand pump Declan painted dark red. The first draw of water splashed clean and cold into her bucket, and she laughed aloud when it hit her bare feet. "Feels like proof," she said, grinning at him. "Of what?" "That we're here to stay." A week later, they moved into the new house. The cabin stood empty for the first time since she'd arrived the previous year. They left it as it was, the hearth swept, the bed stripped, the door latched but never locked. Declan carried her across the threshold, his boots thudding softly on the new floorboards, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, laughter caught in her throat. "Never thought I'd be carried again," she whispered. "You're not being carried," he said. "We're walking forward." The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long light through the open window. Outside, the bees worked the clover, and the chickens rustled in the coop. Inside, the air smelled of fresh pine and the bread she'd baked that morning. As dusk settled, she lit the lamp, and they stood in the warm glow of the room they had built with their own hands, on soil that had once been nothing but promise. She turned to him, fingers brushing the edge of his jaw. "You still think you brought trouble with you?" she asked. He looked around the room, then down at her. "No. I think I brought you." She drew him down into a kiss, slow and steady, and when they pulled apart, she whispered, "Then I was worth the carrying." They lived there for the rest of their days, two people who had lost everything once and found not only peace but each other. Seasons passed, crops rose and fell, and the quilt on their bed grew thin in places from years of wear. But nothing about their love faded. It deepened, like water drawn from the same well, always cold, always clear. And when time slowed them, when their hands grew lined and their steps softened, they still sat together near the hearth, sharing one cup, one silence, one life woven tight as stitches in a seam that never came undone.